This is Taylor-Canfield, Executive Director for Democracy Watch News and Vice President here in Seattle. John Harvey is up next, if you don't mind, John. Let's get a report about tech news. We have a journalist there in Pennsylvania, in Pittsburgh, by the way. And John, what do you have to share with us today about this crazy conference that happened today and the big news at Facebook?
Yeah, thank you, Mark. Today was the, I guess, annual Facebook, or we shouldn't say Facebook anymore, but I'll get to that. Facebook actually changed their name to Meta as the holding company. And so Facebook is now a product under that holding company. But annually, they hold a day of connection with the public, inform the public, and it started off this morning with a presentation by Mark Zuckerberg, who basically talked about the metaverse and what is coming in terms of new innovations. I started off the day trying to enter the conference via my VR headset, but ran into some problems, and that is to be expected. It's still in beta, and I think just too many people were in there. But the brief time that I was in there, the big question that everyone was asking is the new Quest, the Quest Pro that we've all heard about, going to be announced? And people were saying, yeah, I'm going to buy it right now, today. As soon as it's announced, I'm going to place my order. Unfortunately, after listening to Zuckerberg, it is apparent that Facebook, or Meta, is now not going to be coming up with a Quest 2, at least in the interim future. They are working on a high-end model, which basically, they didn't say how high-end, but they made a comment about that it was not going to be as well priced as the Quest 2. And, we've seen the Vive, for example, come out recently, and it's got some super resolution to the graphics. But, for $1,000 or just under $1,000, that's a lot to spend on a 3D VR headset. So we'll see what they come up with. It's called apparently Project Cambria. As I said, higher end price point. And the whole gist of what Zuckerberg was presenting today had to do, in my opinion anyway, with the creation of holograms. A lot of emphasis on what he was talking about pertained to holograms. For instance, the ability to create a holographic avatar of yourself. And one of the examples that he used was people playing basketball, where you could invite friends from around the world, and instead of using the clumsy avatars that we have now, we saw a representation of that person. In fact, using Kodak's technology, we're able to reproduce a person to the point that one of the discussions that was brought up is that one now really is in need of registering one's digital identity, something that we've really never thought of before. And I think there's going to be privacy implications to that, and perhaps copyright implications to that as well. What happens if one has a lookalike or a twin? Who gets to be the approved avatar? So, questions that I'm sure will arise from this. But the new headset, and again, no time was promised, somewhere next year. And, obviously people have heard this before from tech companies that will be coming out with this new product next year. Next year turns into the year after, etc. But I think Facebook, or Meta rather, is very committed to bringing this out. And they said they have a number of other products in development which are interesting. But with the Cambria product, what we're going to see is, as I said, a higher resolution. We're also going to see a better implementation of pass-through. with high resolution color. So one can basically be in VR space and be working at one's desk at the same time, go into pass-through mode and see one's desk, do whatever one needs to do on one's desk, and return into VR mode. And that was another, big push that I heard today, was that this is a new business model. The metaverse is going to enable people to do business better. And I think that follows on along with COVID-19 and people learning how to deal with technology, how to use technology for business purposes. And while Facebook's platforms, for the most part, the VR platforms, I should be specific, are in beta, there's some exciting things happening, and I'm really looking forward to the future. This is John Harvey in Pittsburgh, signing off for today. Handing over back to Mark. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you, John, from Pittsburgh. Well, I'll start with this. Because I'm reporting from Seattle and I'm talking about the arts and music today. And in Seattle, there's a long tradition of a music scene, which goes back to, well, way before the grunge scene, back to Jimi Hendrix, and then way before that to a band called the Sonics, not the basketball team, but actually a great garage rock band from the 60s that people really admire around here. And then way back before that, there were some great Black artists that used to tour in Seattle, including Ray Charles came up here quite a bit. Muddy Waters played, Duke Ellington played, but Seattle is changing quickly and there are some problems. And it's no surprise that affordable housing for artists is disappearing across the United States as most cities continue to experience rapid real estate development, even after a major economic downturn. You also have three main causes for this kind of a situation in Seattle, which involves the displacement of working families, the middle class, and the poor. And that would include artists. One, Seattle is the fastest developing city in the nation. There are more cranes on the skyline of Seattle than you've ever seen in your life. The joke here is that you leave for a couple of weeks and it's true. You come back and you get lost in your own neighborhood. You feel like a tourist again. Real estate prices and rents have skyrocketed, especially since the relocation of major corporate headquarters, including Google, Expedia, Amazon, all sorts of other tech companies, and of course, Microsoft, Starbucks, and others have been here for a while. Seattle has no rent control. There has been petition campaigns launched, which called upon the city council and the mayor and Washington state legislature to bring back rent control, because currently the Washington state law prohibits that policy. Massive development in Seattle has led to the loss of many historic sites, and the city's historic preservation laws are very weak. So most of the historic architecture simply gets bulldozed. I've likened it to a war zone sometimes when entire blocks are raised and all there is rumpled, twisted rebar and slabs of concrete. The Emerald Palace was one blatant example of that failure to protect the community's cultural heritage. That beautiful theater was demolished back in 1991. By the way, to meet the requirements for preservation status, real estate developers only have to preserve the facades of historic buildings. So places like the legendary Troy building in South Lake Union, the Cascade neighborhood, is what another bad example. In the past, the Troy was the center of a very large laundry industry where workers were instrumental in organizing the famous Seattle General Strike in 1919. It was torn down and one wall was preserved, and that's called historic preservation in Seattle. So in 2011, artists at the 619 Western building in Pioneer Square all got evicted. They had hosted art walk events over several decades, sharing their creative work, and they were all evicted at the same time in order to redevelop the Alaska Way Viaduct on Seattle's waterfront. So this is not a new cultural phenomenon in Seattle and other cities. On May 1st, 2000, after serving for 2 historic decades as a major art walk venue in Pioneer Square, 80 artists were evicted from the Washington Shoe Building and Gem Studios, which was a former shoe factory that artists had taken over. Despite organized protests and rallies, the artists were forced to leave their galleries and studios by the building's owners, the Samish Foundation. And a major exodus took place at that time, just happened again and again in the city, where many artists moved to more affordable areas like the industrial Georgetown district of Seattle. But some of those artists simply left the city altogether, moving to New York City, San Francisco, Los Angeles, or smaller rural communities in Washington state. Ironically, the Washington Shoe Building was not fully occupied for many years following that mass eviction of artists, and there was a lot of squatting that went on in that building for years. And then two recent examples of this creative dislocation are the independent music and art venue, the Josephine in the Ballard neighborhood, and the Summit Inn, an artist co-op on Summit Street in the Capitol Hill community. The Josephine has stopped sponsoring music and art events due to complaints from the city and from the building's owner that they didn't have a business license. The Summit Inn was famous for hosting an annual block party featuring local artists and bands. Unfortunately, that apartment building has now been sold, and the new owner has raised rents beyond the ability of most of the artists to pay. And then over the last 6 years, a huge house, a co-op building on Capitol Hill, has sponsored all types of art, music, theater, comedy, performance art, drag shows, gallery shows, film screenings, etc. The inn hosted 30 residents, many of whom were artists and performers. And it was an old mansion built around the turn of the 20th century for a wealthy Seattle family back in 1900. It has also served the community over the years as a halfway house and a mental health facility and other things. Many of the residents of the building curated their own independent gallery. They also hosted free music concerts and plays and other performance events. Well, guess what? That building is no longer available to artists. All of those people were evicted. Another example of how the arts community has been adversely affected by gentrification, by the raising of rents, and the billions of dollars of investment funds that are being poured into Seattle, which tend to build endless luxury condominiums and corporate headquarters, but none of that money ever seems to go to support the arts community or low and income housing. So my question, where are the wealthy art collectors who could serve as benefactors for these struggling artists? And because most of these creative members of the community work very long hours at low paying jobs just to pay their rents. So as the cost of living dramatically increases in Seattle, a lot of artists and musicians are feeling really alienated and isolated by the rest of the corporatized community. Seattle still has a heart and soul which supports music. The Black Tones is an example of a local band that's very popular and has done quite well recently. And they are showing the way for other bands to get out there and play shows in the community and be a part of the community. They do a lot of benefit concerts and interact with the community on a more grassroots level. But so there is hope for the future. The Seattle music scene, the clubs are now open again, and people are starting to go out again to see bands. And so you'll see your local band once again in one of those great iconic clubs in Seattle. And sadly, some of the galleries and artist co-ops are gone. This is Mark Taylor-Canfield reporting from Seattle. And next time we'll do segment number 2 of my ongoing report about gentrification and its effect on the arts. This is Mark Taylor-Canfield in Seattle for Democracy Watch News.
Interesting, Mark. Thank you. Yeah, I haven't been to Seattle for quite a while now.
Yeah, it's still a vibrant city. There are still a lot of restaurants that have survived due to small business loans and other subsidies set up by the city and the county and the state. I did want to mention, because of what Sally had said earlier, that there was a Pew research study done recently that showed that Seattle is also amongst one of those cities that is recovering quicker than a lot of other cities. And they attribute that to actually government spending. And so in Seattle, where there was an extended moratorium on evictions and rental assistance for people who have to move, and all sorts of programs to extend unemployment in Washington state, all of these have helped to an economic rebound in Seattle, where unemployment has gone down and general economic recovery is happening quicker than a lot of cities who aren't making that kind of spending. And also, Seattle has a $16 an hour minimum wage right now, and it's still not enough to keep up, unfortunately, with the cost of rent and the high cost of living in Seattle right now. That's one of the reasons why the Carpenters Union went on strike recently. However, they did approve a new contract, so it looks like they're going to go back to work, and a lot of these construction sites will be active again all across the city. The joke here is that the city bird is the construction crane, because I could look out my window right now, I will see like 8 or 9 of them, on the skyline right now. The skyline changes in Seattle faster than I've seen anywhere else in the world, anywhere else I've ever lived. It's just amazing. So
when New Jersey put in its graduated minimum wage up to $15 an hour, we said then, great, we're making progress, but it's still not enough. It won't be enough then. We'll be back doing it all over.
Well,
But it
I
is.
mean, the good thing about COVID is that it's caused companies with the employment shortage to actually step up and pay people more to encourage them to work, which, I think has helped a bit. I saw a McDonald's here offering, I think it was $20 an hour here in Pittsburgh. At least that's what the paper said. I didn't follow up and call them myself, but
I've heard this month called Striketober. There have been a lot of strikes because employees have just had it. They can't do it anymore. And finally, the employers are having to give some ground, and it's well overdue.
My comment about this is always that if a local regional chain of drive-ins called Dick's Drive-In can afford to pay their employees over $16 an hour starting, also provide medical and dental benefits, paid vacation. I think they get at least 3 weeks paid vacation. They also get paid to volunteer for local nonprofits and charities, and they can apply for education scholarships. So there you go. If a small chain like Dick's, which has a very loyal following in this area, if they can do it, then of course a multinational, multi-billion-dollar corporation like McDonald's could do that. Absolutely, and should. And they should start recycling too. I'm getting really tired of the fact that fast food.
Living wage, you don't have a business.
I'm sorry, Sally, what was that?
I said, somebody said, I saw on Twitter or somewhere, if you can't afford to pay your employees a living wage, you don't really have a business. You have some kind of exploitive something but it doesn't work.
Now, you might start to question your business model at that point. However, that was one of the negotiating points on the $15 an hour minimum wage in Seattle when Shama Sawan, our local city council member, and others were pushing for that. She did decide, and I was at some of those conferences covering this, I saw the negotiations went on, and they did decide to allow a 3-month phase-in period for small businesses. So that was saying to small businesses, we're not against you, it's about the major corporations, and we're still fighting that battle in Seattle to get major corporate taxes on large corporations that make over $25 million a year, because there's a lot of money that Amazon and other corporations throw around here to back candidates like our city attorney candidate. It's caused a huge controversy. Nicole Thomas Kennedy was a legal observer during the Black Lives Matter protests and had to buy, a gas mask, and was really concerned about the health of her 9-year-old daughter. She's being smeared by the right wingers and the conservative business people in Seattle and the police department. And Vulcan, unfortunately, one of the largest development companies here, they're calling her an extreme radical, and she's probably not going to be elected if you look at what the polls are saying. Instead, we're going to get a Republican for the first time as our city attorney, who's a very law and order kind of right-wing conservative. And the police department, this is my opinion, okay, I'm just speaking opinion here, will probably be pleased with that. However, I'm not sure it's good for reforms of the police department and that whole agenda that the city council and the Black Lives Matter movement and a lot of other civil rights activists and community leaders have wanted here. So Ann Davison is the Republican. She was a Democrat, but she switched just recently to the Republican Party, and she's being backed by all these major corporations, and they're putting out very slanderous, negative propaganda about her, saying that she endorses violence towards police and that she encourages rioting and all this kind of stuff. So it's a very scary situation in terms of civil rights, because once a city attorney like that gets in, the police, I'm afraid, are going to feel like they have a free hand, let's just say, to continue their lack of accountability. But that's just an opinion. This is Mark Taylor-Canfield in Seattle, and it looks like we should probably wrap this up. I want to thank everybody on the call today for participating, and thanks, Steve, for the technical assistance and production here. You can check out Democracy Watch News at democracywatchnews.org. We have a podcast, also an audio podcast at democracycast.libsyn.com, but you can find it at all of your local podcast providers. And we want to welcome you to check out these video podcasts as well. and support independent media, because it's really important these days to keep these objective voices out there, or at least somewhat objective voices, or at least independent voices, if not objective. This is Mark Taylor-Canfield reporting for Democracy Watch News. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Mark.